And joining us now, Amber Barno from Concerned Veterans of America. Amber, a veteran herself, served in the United States Army as an OH-58D Kiowa Warrior helicopter pilot for almost 8 years. She served in combat during deployments to Iraq for Operation Iraqi Freedom and to Afghanistan for Operation Enduring Freedom. During her service as a pilot, she earned the title Pilot in Command and Air Mission Commander. And Amber is an author. She also has extensive experience in security and reconnaissance operations. And Amber, my good friend, Republican delegate, and former Navy SEAL Scott Taylor says hello.
Oh, good. Tell him I said hello as well.
Well, he's tuned in right now, so you just say
hi
to him right there. There he is. It's always an honor to have you on. Let's go to the ISIS situation. Many military analysts, and of course yourself having been there, saying, you know, the bombings are going to do so much, and then in order to win this war, because that's what it is, when you drop bombs on people, it's a war. In order to win this, we're going to have to send troops in. What say you?
Well, airstrikes alone are not going to turn the tide of the war and ultimately defeat ISIS. Airstrikes are great at degrading the enemy, sort of setting them back in terms of advancement, as we've seen since ISIS has emerged. But this isn't a sole counterterrorism operation where we can send drones in and take out specific cells or vehicles. We are fighting an army of terrorists that have heavy weaponry. They have tanks, they have armor and artillery, and they're extremely well-funded and organized. And so really, sooner or later, we are going to have an adult conversation about a ground campaign. That doesn't necessarily mean a U.S.-led ground invasion, but it does mean that Obama was very successful with the international coalition leading these airstrikes. But we have to get serious about these partners participating in a ground campaign as well.
Well, so far we have ostensibly 18 of them. No one has committed ground troops. I don't think anyone will. So we can keep waiting for something to happen that isn't going to happen if history shows us they're going to be incapable of putting troops on the ground. So that leaves us, right?
Well, definitely this is not just solely a U.S. problem. This is obviously a regional problem, and it affects Western society as well. So obviously, yes, U.S. is going to be involved because we have the strongest and most capable fighting force in the world. So it definitely has to be a coalition-led fight. And you can't take anything off the table during a time of war, and you especially never tell your enemy what you won't do, which is what we've seen from President Obama when he said, absolutely, there will be no boots on the ground from U.S. forces. So that was not the way you go about telling your enemy how you're going to fight this thing, because they know that airstrikes are not going to be effective long term. They're only going to degrade. They are not going to destroy. And so we, sooner or later, are going to have to commit something, whether that be helping the international partners sort of establish a ground coalition and continuing to arm the Peshmerga and establishing the Iraqi army and training some Syrian rebel forces. Something has to happen if we're going to get serious about destroying ISIS and treating them as the threat that they are.
Now, I want to, if I can, for a minute, Amber, let's go to Vice President Joe Biden continuing his apology tour, 2 apologies in 2 weeks against part of our allies, our allied coalition. The first coming earlier in the week on Turkey, then over the weekend, the United Arab Emirates, where basically Biden accused in a speech earlier in the week the United Arab Emirates and Turkey as being complicit in creating ISIS because of their obsession with getting rid of Assad. Is he sending a mixed message?
He is, and I also wouldn't be sending Joe Biden out as my spokesperson at the moment. It's it's deflecting the blame. We all know that a vacuum was created when U.S. troops were pulled out in 2011, and Iraq was left to fend for themselves when they weren't ready. Their government wasn't ready. Their military wasn't ready, and they were left wide open for a group like ISIS to come in and take over the nation and make significant advancements in Syria and Iraq. And so to completely blame Turkey and some other Arab nations is just an absolute joke. And I think it's a typical vice president sort of misstep, which we've heard him say time and time again. But I think his apologies were due because, I mean, come on, when we're trying to establish an international coalition of, okay, we together are fighting ISIS and we want Turkey's help and we need Turkey's help, it's absolutely, it's unbelievable that he's going after Turkey and blaming them for certain parts of ISIS.
It just seems to be a convoluted message, almost like the same when the president was telling us that ISIS was al-Qaeda's JV team. Amber Barno, you mentioned arming the Peshmerga. You mentioned arming some of the, I guess, remnants of the Iraqi army that still remains that haven't deserted or whatever it is that they do in time of trouble. And now we're going to arm the so-called moderate Syrian rebels. You were over there for a long time. You really understand what goes on there. You saw it with your own eyes, and we're in battle with it. Are any of these groups capable of fighting ISIS, really? Well,
the Peshmerga, they are fierce, organized, well-trained fighters, and they have been for a long while. So they are capable. They're basically the reason on the ground side of this campaign that ISIS hasn't had further advancement. But long term, we need more than just completely relying on the Peshmerga. Oftentimes, they're ill-equipped, which is why they need to be continually armed by this Western coalition. And in terms of the Iraqi army, they are a new military, and I think that we can, unfortunately, we gave them years and billions of dollars worth of training and equipment. And so the fact that, we can all admit that I guess it wasn't enough. It's going to take more than that. Unfortunately, I think it just really depends on the nation and the instability and their inability at the moment to fight back, especially when it comes to leadership. I think that the weakness in the government, it bleeds down through the military channels as well. And arming the Syrian rebels is going to be a very complicated situation. Just the extremist organizations that don't necessarily have the name of ISIS or al-Qaeda exist inside Syria. So you have to be very careful of who you are arming, and it's a very complicated situation, that's for sure.
The non-military layman from the outside, Amber, this strategy really looks like folly, because you're depending on the so-called Iraqi military, which has failed in every time they've been confronted with everything, way before we got involved. And so we're depending on something that, there's no saying, if you go down the same path, you end up in the same place. Now we're depending on Syrian rebels that have also shown no really ability to fight. I think for the average guy out there, it's just crap, because we know at the end of the day that if we're going to defeat these people, we have to go in there. So I think what's really annoying to people is that we continue down this path of, well, we just need to give them more money, we just need to give them more arms, we just need to do this and do that, when to me, we're either going to go in there and wipe them out and make the commitment, or we need to just get the heck out of there. I don't see this strategy as working.
Well, and it's not going to long term. An air campaign doesn't work. History proves that time and time again. And that's why I said you never tell the enemy what you will not do. That's unbelievable that President Obama continues to to do that on all different sorts of conflicts, including Russia. But in terms of ISIS, we have to look at big picture what mission success looks like, and that is defeating ISIS. And just as I mentioned, airstrikes alone is not going to complete the mission in this case. And so we have to get serious about what that is going to take. We need these other Arab nations that participated in the airstrikes and continue to do so. We need them to have a long-term commitment to this crisis. We need them to supply ground forces and resources and funding and help pay for this war, because that's what we're in. We are in a war. And we can't turn a blind eye and just tell the American people, oh, we had an air campaign. Every couple of days we take out a few ISIS vehicles and fighters and tanks and act as though that is really going to turn the tide. And it is not, just as we're seeing it with ISIS advancements in Kobani right now, up on the Turkey border. Go ahead, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and so it's the ISIS will adapt, and they have already adapted to U.S. airstrikes. They are moving their command and control centers. They are changing their supply routes. Their leaders are constantly moving and going underground. They're not necessarily operating in the open as they were, as we've seen in months past, basically moving in convoys out in the open now. Right. They're very much blending in with the general population.
Right. Well, I think at the end of the day, the nail on the head, we're going to have to get involved. It's going to have to be troops, and it's going to have to be a big number. Otherwise, I think this whole thing is a facade, almost like the tail wagging the dog, as they say. We want to thank Amber Barno for being with us from Concerned Veterans for America.
Thanks for having me, John.